Morgan's hands trembled with rage as he discovered Thunder's empty stall and the millionaire's mocking note, "Reconsider my offer." The wealthy thief who believed money could buy or steal anything was about to learn the devastating cost of taking the one thing Morgan would die to protect. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning sun peeked over the rolling hills of Willow Creek, casting golden rays across Morgan Harper's modest farm. The old wooden fence that surrounded his property had seen better days, much like Morgan himself. At 62, his weathered face told stories of decades spent working the land, fighting droughts and surviving economic hardships. Yet despite life's challenges, Morgan's eyes still sparkled with the same determination that had carried him through the toughest times. His farm wasn't much compared to the sprawling estates that had begun to populate the countryside as wealthy city folks bought up land for weekend retreats. But to Morgan, these 15 acres represented everything that mattered: his family's legacy, his life's work, and most importantly, his home. "Come on, Thunder," Morgan called out, his voice carrying across the morning air. In response, a magnificent black stallion trotted toward him, mane flowing like silk in the gentle breeze. Thunder was no ordinary horse. Standing at 17 hands high with a gleaming coat that seemed to capture the light in ways that defied explanation, he was the pride of Morgan's small farm. Morgan reached out, running his calloused hand along Thunder's strong neck. "That's my boy," he whispered, offering an apple from his pocket. The bond between them was evident to anyone who saw them together, a connection forged through years of mutual trust and respect. Thunder had come into Morgan's life 8 years ago, a frightened and injured yearling found abandoned at the edge of his property during a particularly vicious storm, thus the name Thunder. Morgan had nursed him back to health, spending nights in the stable, feeding him by hand when he was too weak to stand. Against all odds, Thunder had survived, growing into a horse of rare beauty and exceptional intelligence. "We've got work to do today," Morgan said, leading Thunder toward the barn. The horse followed willingly, no halter needed, responding to Morgan's gentle voice commands. Together they would mend the fence on the north side of the property, a task that would have been nearly impossible for Morgan to complete alone. Thunder would carry the tools and new fence posts, standing patiently nearby as Morgan worked. As they rounded the corner of the barn, Morgan noticed a sleek black car pulling up his gravel driveway, dust billowing behind it. He frowned, not recognizing the vehicle. Visitors were rare at Harper Farm, especially ones driving cars that probably cost more than his entire property. The car stopped, and a tall man in an expensive suit stepped out. Even from a distance, Morgan could see the platinum watch glinting on his wrist and the perfectly polished leather shoes that seemed entirely out of place on a dirt farm. The stranger surveyed the property with calculating eyes before spotting Morgan and Thunder. "Good morning," the man called out, striding toward them with confident steps. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Morgan nodded cautiously. "Can I help you with something? You seem a bit lost." The man laughed, a sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Not lost at all. I'm Alexander Caldwell. Perhaps you've heard of me?" Morgan shook his head. He didn't follow the news much, and names of rich folks from the city meant little to him. Something flickered across Caldwell's face, annoyance perhaps, before his practiced smile returned. "I own Caldwell Enterprises. Real estate primarily, though we've diversified in recent years." "I see," Morgan replied, though he didn't really. "What brings you to Harper Farm, Mr. Caldwell?" Caldwell's attention had shifted entirely to Thunder, his eyes widening as he took in the stallion's powerful frame and exceptional features. "My word," he breathed, taking a step closer. "What a magnificent animal." Thunder shifted, moving slightly behind Morgan, sensing something in the stranger that made him uneasy. "This is Thunder," Morgan said, placing a reassuring hand on the horse's neck. "Been with me for 8 years now." "Extraordinary," Caldwell murmured, circling around to get a better look. "I've seen champion thoroughbreds that don't have half his presence." He turned to Morgan, expression suddenly businesslike. "I'd like to buy him." Morgan blinked, taken aback by the directness of the request. "I'm afraid Thunder's not for sale, Mr. Caldwell." "Everything has a price, Mr. Harper. Name yours." "You misunderstand. He's not for sale at any price." Caldwell's smile tightened. $10,000. Morgan shook his head. $20,000. "Mr. Caldwell, $50,000 cash." Caldwell's voice had an edge to it now, unused to being refused. Morgan sighed, looking at Thunder, who stood watching the exchange with intelligent eyes. "You could offer me $1 million and my answer would be the same. Thunder isn't livestock to be bought and sold. He's family." The millionaire stared at Morgan for a long moment, as if trying to decipher a particularly complex puzzle. Finally, he nodded, reaching into his jacket pocket and producing a business card. "I understand," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "If you change your mind, my number is on the card. My offer stands." Morgan took the card more out of politeness than interest, tucking it into his shirt pocket. "We won't be changing our minds, but thank you for stopping by." Caldwell cast one last lingering look at Thunder before returning to his car. As he drove away, Morgan couldn't shake the feeling that this wouldn't be the last he'd see of Alexander Caldwell. "Come on, boy," he said to Thunder. "Let's get to that fence." What Morgan didn't see was Caldwell pulling over just beyond the bend in the road, making a phone call with determination etched across his features. "Jenkins," he said into the phone, "I need information on Morgan Harper and his farm in Willow Creek. Everything you can find, financial situation, property details, any outstanding debts." He paused, listening. "No, I haven't given up. When I want something, I get it, one way or another." Over the next few weeks, Morgan noticed increased activity around his property. Strange cars would drive slowly past the farm, and men in suits were seen talking to his neighbors. Then the letters started arriving, notices about property taxes, bank reassessments, and zoning regulations he'd never heard of before. One particularly warm afternoon, as Morgan sat on his porch drinking lemonade with his longtime friend and local veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Collins, he confided his concerns. "It's the strangest thing, Sarah. Ever since that Caldwell fellow came by asking about Thunder, I've been getting all these notices. The bank even called about my mortgage, saying they needed to review the terms." Sarah frowned, setting down her glass. "Alexander Caldwell, the real estate mogul? You know him?" "Only by reputation," she replied, her expression troubled. "He's known for getting what he wants, Morgan, and he's not always particular about how he gets it." Morgan's gaze drifted to where Thunder grazed peacefully in the nearby paddock. "Well, he's not getting Thunder, that's for certain." Sarah squeezed his arm gently. "Just be careful. Men like Caldwell play by different rules than folks like us." Little did Morgan know how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how quickly his world would be turned upside down by a man accustomed to taking whatever he desired, regardless of the cost to others. The troubles began in earnest a week later, when Morgan received an official-looking envelope from the county assessor's office. Inside was a notice claiming his property taxes had been underpaid for the past 3 years, with a demand for $12,000 in back taxes and penalties, due within 30 days. Morgan stared at the paper, his hands trembling slightly. The amount might as well have been $1 million. He simply didn't have it. "This can't be right," he muttered to himself, reaching for his filing cabinet where he meticulously kept every receipt and tax notice. After an hour of reviewing his records, Morgan confirmed what he already knew. He had paid his taxes in full, on time, every year. Something wasn't adding up. The next morning, Morgan drove his old pickup truck into town, the tax notice folded in his pocket. The county office was busier than usual, and he waited patiently for his turn, watching people come and go with various expressions of frustration or relief on their faces. "Next," called a tired-looking woman behind the counter. Morgan approached, placing the notice before her. "I've received this tax bill, but there must be some mistake. I've paid all my taxes," he explained, pulling out his carefully organized receipts. The woman, her nameplate read Margaret, studied the notice, then turned to her computer, fingers clicking rapidly on the keyboard. Her brow furrowed as she scrolled through his records. "That's odd," she murmured, more to herself than to Morgan. "According to our system, your property was reassessed last month. The value has nearly doubled." "Reassessed? Nobody came out to reassess my property," Morgan protested. Margaret looked uncomfortable. "It says here the reassessment was ordered by—" She paused, squinting at the screen. "By the County Development Board in conjunction with the Regional Planning Commission." Morgan had never heard of either group making such decisions. "Can I appeal this?" "Of course," Margaret said, pulling out a form. "But it might take some time to process. The deadline for payment still stands." As Morgan filled out the appeal form, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. This wasn't a simple clerical error. It felt targeted, deliberate. On his way out, he nearly collided with a tall man in an expensive suit who was entering the building. It took Morgan a moment to recognize him as one of the men who had been seen talking to his neighbors recently. That afternoon, Morgan visited the local bank where his family had done business for generations. His mortgage had been with them for nearly 30 years, and he had never missed a payment. The young manager, who had replaced old Mr. Peterson just last year, greeted him with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Harper, thank you for coming in. We've been reviewing some of our long-term accounts, and there are concerns about your mortgage." "Concerns?" Morgan echoed. "I've never been late with a payment." The manager nodded, adjusting his tie. "Yes, your payment history is excellent. However, there's been a change in our policy regarding agricultural properties. We're requiring updated collateral assessments for all farm loans." "After 30 years?" Morgan asked incredulously. "The banking industry is evolving, Mr. Harper. We need to ensure all our loans meet current standards." By the time Morgan left the bank, he had been informed that unless he could provide additional collateral or refinance under the new terms, with a significantly higher interest rate, his loan might be called due in full. Driving home, Morgan couldn't shake the feeling that these sudden problems were connected to Alexander Caldwell's interest in Thunder. It seemed too coincidental, yet he struggled to understand how one wealthy man could orchestrate such widespread pressure. As he pulled into his driveway, Morgan noticed Thunder pacing anxiously along the fence line, something he rarely did without cause. Parking quickly, Morgan hurried toward the paddock, calling out to the stallion. Thunder trotted over immediately, nudging Morgan's chest with his nose, his dark eyes reflecting a distress that mirrored Morgan's own. "What is it, boy?" Morgan whispered, running his hands down Thunder's neck, checking for any signs of injury or illness. Finding nothing physically wrong, he looked around, sensing something amiss in the quiet afternoon air. It was then that he noticed the fresh tire tracks cutting across his east field, tracks too deep and wide to belong to his own vehicles. Someone had been on his property while he was in town. The realization sent a chill down his spine. That evening, as dusk settled over the farm, Morgan sat on his porch with his shotgun across his lap. Not loaded, but a comfort nonetheless. The chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl provided a soundtrack to his troubled thoughts. In the distance, Thunder's occasional soft nickering from the stable reassured Morgan that for now at least, his friend was safe. The crunch of tires on gravel snapped Morgan from his reverie. Headlights swept across the yard as a vehicle pulled up. Morgan tensed, then relaxed slightly when he recognized Sarah's old station wagon. "Thought you might need some company," she said, climbing the porch steps with a thermos in hand. "And coffee. You look like you could use it." Morgan accepted the thermos gratefully. "Been quite a day." Sarah settled into the chair beside him, her expression concerned. "I heard about your visit to the county office. News travels fast." "Seems everything's falling apart at once," Morgan said, filling her in on the bank visit and the mysterious tire tracks. Sarah listened without interrupting, her frown deepening. When Morgan finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "This isn't a coincidence, Morgan," she finally said. "I've been asking around about Caldwell. He's known for these tactics, creating financial pressure until people have no choice but to sell what he wants." "I won't sell Thunder," Morgan said firmly, "no matter what." Sarah's eyes were sympathetic but worried. "I know, but Caldwell may not give you a choice. People say he's not above manipulating circumstances to get his way." They sat in silence, sipping coffee as the night deepened around them. Before leaving, Sarah placed a hand on Morgan's arm. "Be careful, Morgan, and maybe consider sending Thunder somewhere safe for a while." Morgan shook his head. "He belongs here, with me." The next morning brought more unwelcome surprises. A notice from the county health department claimed an anonymous tip had reported unsafe conditions at Harper Farm, necessitating an immediate inspection. Later that day, a water management official appeared, citing concerns about watershed contamination from agricultural runoff. Each interaction left Morgan more convinced that he was being deliberately targeted, but he remained resolute. That night, he moved his cot into the stable, determined to keep watch over Thunder personally. For 3 nights, Morgan slept fitfully beside Thunder's stall, waking at every sound. On the 4th night, exhaustion finally overcame him, and he fell into a deep sleep. He never heard the stable door slide open, never saw the shadowy figures that moved silently toward Thunder's stall. When Morgan awoke at dawn, the stable door stood open, swinging gently in the morning breeze. Thunder's stall was empty. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Morgan staggered to his feet, calling Thunder's name as he ran outside, scanning the paddocks and fields. But the magnificent black stallion was nowhere to be seen. In the soft earth outside the stable, multiple boot prints and tire tracks told the story of what had happened while Morgan slept. Thunder had been taken, stolen from right under his nose, and Morgan had little doubt about who was responsible. With shaking hands, Morgan reached for his phone to call the sheriff. As he did, he spotted something white fluttering on the fence post, a business card. Alexander Caldwell's business card, with a handwritten note on the back. "Reconsider my offer." Sheriff Dan Wilson had known Morgan Harper for over 30 years. They'd gone to the same high school, fished the same streams, and even dated the same girl back in their youth, though neither spoke of that anymore. So when he saw Morgan stride into the sheriff's office, face ashen and hands trembling with a mixture of rage and despair, Wilson knew something truly terrible had happened. "They took him, Dan," Morgan said without preamble, his voice hoarse. "They took Thunder." Wilson gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Morgan. Start from the beginning." Over the next half hour, Morgan detailed everything. Caldwell's initial visit, the sudden financial pressures, the suspicious activities around his farm, and finally, the theft of Thunder. He placed Caldwell's business card with its handwritten note on Wilson's desk. The sheriff studied the card, his expression grave. "This is pretty damning, Morgan, but it's not proof. It could be interpreted different ways." "Different ways?" Morgan's voice rose. "How many ways can you interpret 'reconsider my offer' left at the scene of a theft?" Wilson sighed, leaning back in his chair. Look, I believe you, but Alexander Caldwell isn't some petty crook. He's got connections all the way to the state capitol. We need to be careful how we proceed. While you're being careful, Thunder is God knows where, Morgan said, frustration evident in every line of his body. I'll send Deputy Ramirez out to take photographs, document the scene. We'll file a report and start looking for Thunder. Wilson hesitated. But Morgan, be prepared. If Caldwell's behind this, Thunder might be a long way from here by now. Morgan stood, steadying himself against the desk. I'm not waiting for reports and procedures, Dan. I'm going to find my horse. As Morgan turned to leave, Wilson called after him. Don't do anything foolish, Morgan. Let the law handle this. But Morgan was already gone, the door swinging shut behind him. Outside, Morgan climbed into his truck, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The law would move too slowly. He knew that. By the time the sheriff's department navigated the proper channels to investigate someone like Caldwell, Thunder could be anywhere. Morgan started the truck and drove, not toward home, but in the direction of Caldwell Estates, the sprawling property Alexander Caldwell had purchased and developed on the outskirts of town. He had no plan, only determination fueled by a burning sense of injustice. Caldwell Estates was a monument to wealth and privilege, with its ornate iron gates and manicured grounds. Morgan parked his truck along the road outside the property, drawing curious glances from security personnel patrolling the perimeter. The main house was visible in the distance, a modern mansion of glass and stone that seemed to both embrace and dominate the natural landscape. Morgan's attention, however, was drawn to the stables, an impressive structure that could easily house dozens of horses in luxury that most people couldn't afford for themselves. If Thunder was anywhere on the property, it would be there. As Morgan contemplated his next move, a sleek car pulled up beside him. The window lowered, revealing Sarah's concerned face. The sheriff called me, she explained. He thought you might do something rash. I need to find Thunder, Morgan said simply. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. I know, but getting yourself arrested for trespassing won't help him. She gestured to the car's passenger seat. Get in. I have an idea. Reluctantly, Morgan complied. As they drove away from Caldwell Estates, Sarah explained her plan. I know someone who works for Caldwell, a groom in his stables. If Thunder's there, Jamie will know. Morgan looked at her sharply. Why didn't you mention this before? Because Jamie could lose their job for talking to us, but Thunder's welfare comes first. She pulled into the parking lot of a diner on the edge of town. Jamie's meeting us here in 15 minutes. Inside the diner, they sat at a booth near the back, Morgan too agitated to even pretend interest in the menu. When the bell above the door jingled, Sarah looked up expectantly. A young person with short auburn hair and wary eyes entered, scanning the diner before spotting Sarah and approaching their booth. This is Jamie, Sarah said quietly. Jamie, Morgan Harper. Jamie slid into the booth beside Sarah, keeping their voice low. I can't stay long. If anyone sees me talking to you... We understand, Morgan said, leaning forward. Is Thunder there? At Caldwell's stables? Jamie hesitated, then nodded. A black stallion was brought in early this morning. He's magnificent, but clearly distressed. Won't let anyone near him. Relief and renewed anger coursed through Morgan. That's him. That's Thunder. Caldwell's calling him Midnight Emperor now, Jamie continued. Says he's going to be the foundation of his new breeding program. There's a big party at the estate tomorrow night to unveil him to potential investors. Morgan's hand clenched around his coffee mug. He can't do this. Thunder was stolen from my property. Jamie looked nervously toward the door. Mr. Caldwell claims he purchased the horse legally. There's even paperwork, registration, bill of sale, the works. Forgeries, Morgan spat. All of it. Maybe, Jamie conceded, but no one's going to question it, not with Caldwell's influence. Sarah placed a calming hand on Morgan's arm. Is Thunder being treated well, at least? Jamie's expression darkened. Physically, yes. Best feed, climate-controlled stall, but they hesitated again. But what? Morgan pressed. Caldwell wants him ready for the party tomorrow. When Thunder wouldn't cooperate with the trainers this morning, Caldwell ordered them to do whatever it takes. They're going to sedate him if necessary. Morgan stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. I need to get him out of there. Tonight. Morgan, no, Sarah started, but Jamie interrupted. I might be able to help. They slid a key card across the table. This will get you through the service entrance to the stables. The security cameras on the east side have been glitchy. They go out for about 10 minutes every night around 2 a.m. while the system resets. That's your window. Morgan took the card, nodding gratefully. Thank you. I was never here, Jamie said, standing, and I never gave you that card. If anyone asks, you overpowered me and took it. After Jamie left, Sarah turned to Morgan, her expression torn between concern and resolution. This is breaking and entering, Morgan. If you're caught, I'm not leaving Thunder there, Morgan said firmly. Are you with me or not? Sarah sighed, then straightened her shoulders. I'll bring my trailer and medical supplies in case he's been sedated. Meanwhile, at Caldwell Estates, Alexander Caldwell stood outside Thunder's stall, watching the magnificent horse with covetous eyes. Despite being confined in an unfamiliar place, Thunder maintained his dignity, his head held high, his dark eyes alert and defiant. You're everything I hoped you'd be, Caldwell murmured, reaching a hand toward the stall door. Thunder backed away, ears flattened against his head. A stable hand approached cautiously. Sir, the horse still won't accept handling. For tomorrow's event, I don't care what it takes, Caldwell interrupted, never taking his eyes off Thunder. Sedate him if necessary, but he will be presented tomorrow night as the crown jewel of my collection. Yes, sir, the stable hand replied, casting a sympathetic glance at Thunder before retreating. Caldwell lingered a moment longer, admiring his prize. That old farmer didn't deserve you, he said softly. You were meant for greatness, not wasting away on some rundown farm. Thunder snorted and turned away, as if understanding and rejecting Caldwell's words. As night fell, Morgan prepared for what might be the most desperate act of his life. His weathered hands checked and rechecked the halter and lead rope he would use to bring Thunder home. In his pocket, Jamie's keycard felt like both a lifeline and a burning coal. His means of rescue and potentially his ticket to jail. Sarah arrived just after midnight, her ancient horse trailer hitched to her station wagon. Her face was set with determination, though fear flickered in her eyes. Last chance to reconsider, she said as Morgan climbed into the passenger seat. Morgan shook his head. Thunder's family. You don't abandon family. With a nod, Sarah started the car, and they set off toward Caldwell Estates, and whatever consequences awaited them there. The night was moonless, clouds obscuring the stars and casting Caldwell Estates into deep shadow. Sarah parked her station wagon and trailer a quarter-mile down the road, hidden behind a stand of oak trees. Morgan checked his watch, 1:40 a.m. They had 20 minutes before the security cameras would temporarily go offline. Remember the plan, Sarah whispered as they approached the property on foot. In and out in 10 minutes. No confrontations if we can help it. Morgan nodded, his weathered face grim with determination. He wore dark clothes and soft-soled boots to minimize noise, the halter and lead rope tucked securely in his jacket. Sarah carried a small medical kit, just in case Thunder had been sedated. The service entrance was exactly where Jamie had described, a nondescript door set into the side of the stable building away from the main house. Morgan held his breath as he swiped the key card through the reader. For a heart-stopping moment, Nothing happened. Then a soft click, and a green light indicated the door was unlocked. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a narrow corridor lined with supply closets and tack rooms. The main stable area lay ahead, dimly lit by night lights that cast long shadows across the polished concrete floor. The air was warm and carried the familiar scent of horses, hay, and leather, scents that would normally comfort Morgan, but now only heightened his anxiety. "Which stall?" Sarah whispered, peering down the long aisle where elegant horse heads occasionally poked out, curious about the late-night visitors. Morgan didn't need to check the nameplates on each stall. He knew Thunder would recognize his presence. He moved slowly down the center aisle, softly clicking his tongue in a pattern that was uniquely his and Thunder's way of communicating. Halfway down the aisle, a soft nickering sound responded to his call. Morgan quickened his pace, Sarah close behind. They reached a large corner stall where Thunder stood alert, ears pricked forward, recognizing Morgan instantly despite the dim light. "Hey, boy," Morgan whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he extended his hand through the stall bars. Thunder pressed his muzzle against Morgan's palm, breathing in his scent. "We're going home." Sarah checked her watch nervously. 2 minutes until the cameras reset. We need to hurry." Morgan unlatched the stall door carefully, wincing at the slight creak of metal. Thunder stepped forward eagerly, nudging Morgan's chest in greeting. With practiced movements, Morgan slipped the halter over Thunder's head and attached the lead rope. "Any signs of sedation?" Sarah asked, quickly examining the horse. Morgan shook his head. They must have been planning it for tomorrow. He stroked Thunder's neck reassuringly. "Let's go." As they turned to leave, Thunder suddenly tensed, his head lifting sharply. A moment later, Morgan heard what had alerted his horse. Footsteps approaching from the far end of the stable. "Night check," Sarah mouthed silently, pulling Morgan and Thunder into the shadows of the stall. A security guard appeared, flashlight in hand, methodically checking each stall. His light swept across the concrete floor, moving steadily closer to their position. Morgan held Thunder's head close to his chest, silently willing the horse to remain quiet. The guard paused at an empty water bucket in a nearby stall, sighed in annoyance, and stepped inside to refill it from a nearby tap. While his back was turned, Morgan seized the opportunity, guiding Thunder quietly toward the service door, Sarah leading the way. They had almost reached the exit when Thunder's hoof struck an empty feed bucket, sending it clattering across the floor. The guard spun around, his flashlight beam catching them in its harsh glare. "Hey, stop right there!" he shouted, reaching for the radio at his belt. "Run!" Morgan urged, as Sarah pushed open the door. They burst outside, Thunder moving willingly alongside them, seeming to understand the urgency of their escape. Behind them, alarms began to blare, cutting through the quiet night. Floodlights suddenly illuminated the grounds, turning night to harsh artificial day. Morgan and Sarah broke into a run, Thunder keeping pace beside them, his powerful legs easily matching their desperate sprint. They cut across the manicured lawn, heading for the tree line that would provide some cover. Morgan could hear shouts and the sound of vehicles starting up. They wouldn't make it to Sarah's trailer before being spotted. "This way," Sarah gasped, veering toward a creek that ran along the property boundary. "The water will mask our scent if they bring dogs." They splashed through the shallow creek, its cold water soaking their boots and pant legs. Thunder followed without hesitation, trusting Morgan completely, despite the chaos around them. On the far bank, they entered a dense stand of trees, the darkness enveloping them once more as they moved away from the floodlights. For 20 minutes they pushed through the underbrush, following the creek downstream, putting distance between themselves and Caldwell Estates. Only when the sounds of pursuit had faded did they pause to catch their breath. "They'll be watching the roads," Sarah panted, leaning against a tree trunk. "We need to get Thunder somewhere safe, somewhere they won't look immediately." Morgan nodded, his mind racing. My cousin Mike's place. It's about 3 miles through these woods. He has a small barn where Thunder can stay until we figure out our next move. With renewed purpose, they continued their journey, moving more carefully now through the dark forest. Thunder followed Morgan's lead trustingly, occasionally nickering softly, as if to reassure his human friend that all would be well. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached Mike Harper's modest property. Mike, a bachelor in his 50s who worked nights at the local factory, was just returning home when he spotted them emerging from the trees, a bedraggled trio covered in mud, twigs, and exhaustion. "Morgan," Mike called in disbelief, hurrying toward them. "What in heaven's name?" "Need your help, Mike," Morgan interrupted, quickly explaining the situation while Sarah checked Thunder for any injuries from their forest trek. Mike's weathered face hardened as he listened. "Caldwell, huh? That explains a lot. Been hearing rumors about how he's been pressuring folks to sell land around here." He patted Thunder's neck. "Your horse can stay in my barn as long as needed. No one will think to look here." After settling Thunder with fresh water and hay, they gathered in Mike's kitchen, nursing cups of strong coffee and planning their next steps. "Caldwell will claim we stole his horse," Morgan said grimly. "He has forged papers and he'll use them." "Then we need to prove Thunder is yours," Sarah replied. "I've been your vet for years. I have records, photos, documentation of every treatment." Mike shook his head. "Might not be enough against someone like Caldwell. He's got judges and politicians in his pocket." "There's something else we can try," Sarah said slowly, an idea forming. "Thunder has a distinctive scar on his left flank from that barbed wire incident 5 years ago. I took detailed photos for my records, showing the healing process." Morgan nodded, remembering the injury that had nearly cost Thunder his life. Another time he had nursed the horse back to health. "The scar has a very specific shape," Sarah continued, "like a jagged lightning bolt. It's under his winter coat now, but it's there. If Caldwell's forged papers include a medical history, it won't match that injury, and if they don't mention it at all, that's proof they're incomplete." "It's something," Morgan agreed, though doubt clouded his features. "But will it be enough?" Mike refilled their coffee cups. "You're forgetting something important, Morgan. People in this town know you. They know how you came by Thunder, how you saved him. Caldwell might have money and influence, but he doesn't have the truth." As they continued discussing their options, a news alert chimed on Mike's phone. He picked it up, his eyebrows rising as he read the screen. "Well now," he said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Seems like Mr. Caldwell's night just got even worse than yours." He turned the phone so Morgan and Sarah could see the breaking news headline, "Business magnate Alexander Caldwell under federal investigation for fraud and racketeering." Morgan stared at the headline, struggling to process this unexpected turn of events. "Federal investigation? What for?" Mike scrolled through the article, reading aloud. "The FBI raided Caldwell Enterprises headquarters late last night, seizing computers and documents. Allegations include fraudulent real estate practices, tax evasion, and bribing local officials to manipulate property values and regulations." He looked up, a grim smile on his face. "Sounds familiar, doesn't it?" Sarah leaned closer to read over his shoulder. "It says the investigation has been ongoing for months. Confidential informants within the company provided evidence of systematic corruption. They've frozen his assets," Mike added, continuing to read. "All Caldwell properties are under scrutiny, including recent acquisitions." A strange mixture of emotions washed over Morgan: vindication, relief, and lingering anxiety. "This changes things," he said slowly. "But it doesn't solve our immediate problem. I still have no legal proof that Thunder is mine." "Actually," Sarah replied, her eyes still on the news article, "this might help us more than you think. If Caldwell's business practices are under investigation, that would include his methods of acquiring assets like Thunder. Morgan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the kitchen floor. I need to talk to Sheriff Wilson. Now that there's a federal investigation, he might be more willing to listen. Mike nodded. I'll keep an eye on Thunder. Sarah, you gather whatever veterinary records you have that prove Morgan's ownership. Within an hour, Morgan was sitting across from Sheriff Wilson once again, but this time the dynamics had shifted. The sheriff looked tired. He'd clearly been up all night dealing with the fallout from the Caldwell investigation, but he listened attentively as Morgan explained what had happened. So you broke into Caldwell Estates and took Thunder, Wilson summarized when Morgan finished, his expression carefully neutral. I reclaimed my stolen property, Morgan corrected firmly. Caldwell had Thunder taken from my farm. I have proof of ownership dating back 8 years. Wilson sighed, rubbing his temples. This complicates things, Morgan. Yes, there's a federal investigation into Caldwell, but that doesn't give you the right to take matters into your own hands. What would you have done in my position, Dan? Morgan asked quietly. If someone took something irreplaceable from you, and you knew exactly where it was, would you have waited for the legal system to maybe, eventually, do something about it? The sheriff held Morgan's gaze for a long moment, then looked away. The feds are setting up a task force to handle Caldwell's case. They'll be here by noon. I'll arrange for you to speak with them about Thunder. He paused, then added reluctantly, Until then, I need to know where the horse is, Morgan. He's safe, Morgan replied, unwilling to compromise Mike's position. And he'll stay where he is until I have assurance that Caldwell can't take him again. Wilson looked like he wanted to argue, but instead nodded slowly. Fair enough. But I'm trusting you to bring him in when the time comes. This needs to be resolved properly. As Morgan left the sheriff's office, his phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice tense with urgency. Morgan, you need to get back here now. Caldwell's men are at Mike's place. They're demanding to search the property. Morgan's blood ran cold. I'm on my way. Tell Mike not to let them in without a warrant. He drove as fast as he dared back to Mike's property, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When he arrived, he found 2 black SUVs parked in the driveway. Mike stood on the porch, arms crossed, blocking the entrance to his home. Sarah was beside him, her posture equally defiant. 3 men in suits faced them, one gesturing emphatically as he spoke. Morgan parked and strode toward the confrontation, anger building with each step. As he approached, he recognized one of the men as Jenkins, Caldwell's chief of security. Mr. Harper, Jenkins said coldly, turning to face him. Just the man we're looking for. You've stolen property belonging to Mr. Caldwell, and we're here to recover it. The only thing stolen here was my horse, Morgan replied, keeping his voice steady despite his rage. And he's not property. He's a living being who was taken against his will from the only home he's known for 8 years. Jenkins smiled thinly. We have documentation proving Mr. Caldwell's ownership. If you cooperate now, he might be persuaded not to press charges for the break-in and theft. Your documentation is as fake as Caldwell's business practices, Morgan shot back. Why else would the FBI be crawling all over his company right now? A flicker of unease crossed Jenkins's face. Mr. Caldwell's legal issues are separate from this matter. Now where is the horse? Before Morgan could respond, the rumble of approaching vehicles drew everyone's attention. 2 police cruisers pulled up, followed by an unmarked black sedan. Sheriff Wilson stepped out of the first cruiser, and from the sedan emerged 2 individuals in suits who could only be federal agents. Gentlemen, Wilson called out as he approached, I think we need to de-escalate this situation. Jenkins turned, visibly annoyed at the interruption. This is a private matter, Sheriff. Mr. Caldwell's property was stolen, and we're here to recover it. One of the federal agents stepped forward, presenting identification. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI. And this is no longer a private matter, Mr. Jenkins. As of an hour ago, all assets associated with Alexander Caldwell and Caldwell Enterprises are subject to our investigation, including any recently acquired horses. Jenkins's confident demeanor faltered. We have paperwork proving. Paperwork we'll need to examine as part of our investigation, Agent Torres interrupted smoothly, particularly given the allegations of document forgery that have surfaced. The second agent approached Morgan. Mr. Harper, I'm Agent Davis. We'd like to speak with you about your horse and the circumstances surrounding Mr. Caldwell's claim to ownership. Over the next 2 hours, Morgan, Sarah, and Mike gave detailed statements to the federal agents. Sarah provided Thunder's complete veterinary history, including time-stamped photographs of the distinctive scar on his flank. Morgan shared his financial records, showing the sudden coordinated pressure that had been applied after he refused to sell Thunder to Caldwell. Agent Torres listened intently, occasionally making notes. This fits the pattern we're seeing in other cases, she said finally. Caldwell targeted properties or assets he wanted, then manufactured financial crises for the owners until they had no choice but to sell. In some instances, Agent Davis added, we found evidence that he arranged for the theft of items he couldn't purchase legitimately, then produced forged documentation of ownership. Morgan felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. So you believe me about Thunder? Agent Torres nodded. Your documentation is substantially more credible than anything Caldwell has presented. We'll need to make Thunder part of our official investigation, but there's no reason he can't remain in your care while that process unfolds. As the federal agents prepared to leave, Jenkins and his men were noticeably subdued. The chief of security approached Morgan, his earlier arrogance replaced by a wary respect. This isn't over, Harper, he said quietly. Mr. Caldwell doesn't give up easily. Morgan met his gaze steadily. Neither do I. After everyone had departed, Morgan, Sarah, and Mike stood in the yard, processing the events of the day. Should we bring Thunder back to your farm? Mike asked. Morgan considered this, then shook his head. Not yet. Caldwell's desperate now, which makes him more dangerous. Thunder stays hidden until this is truly resolved. Sarah squeezed his arm gently. The community needs to know what's happening, Morgan. Caldwell has been pressuring other farmers and business owners. Your story might encourage others to come forward. Morgan nodded slowly, an idea forming. Then let's make sure they hear it. By the following evening, the story of Thunder and Morgan's stand against Alexander Caldwell had spread throughout Willow Creek. Sarah had contacted Eliza Dawson, editor of the local newspaper and longtime friend, who published a front-page article detailing Caldwell's tactics in Morgan's fight to protect his beloved horse. The piece included a striking photograph of Morgan and Thunder from happier times, the bond between man and horse, evident in the way they leaned into one another. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Morgan's phone rang constantly with calls from neighbors and even strangers offering support, sharing their own stories of pressure from Caldwell and volunteering help in any way needed. Some brought food to Mike's house, others offered legal assistance or simply stood guard, creating an informal community watch to ensure Thunder's safety. I had no idea so many people had been affected, Morgan said, sitting on Mike's porch as yet another truck pulled up, this one carrying the Peterson family who owned the apple orchard on the far side of town. Sarah smiled, watching as Mrs. Peterson unloaded a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Caldwell's been working in the shadows, making everyone think they were alone in facing his tactics. Now they know differently. Inside the barn, Thunder had settled comfortably, seemingly content as long as Morgan visited regularly. The horse's natural wariness around strangers had made him reluctant to accept care from anyone else at first. But he had gradually come to tolerate Mike and Sarah, accepting feed and water from their hands. As twilight deepened into night, Morgan sat on a hay bale beside Thunder's stall, gently brushing the stallion's coat. This quiet ritual had always been a form of meditation for both of them, a way to connect and calm each other. Thunder leaned into the brush strokes, occasionally nickering softly in contentment. "We're going to be all right, boy," Morgan murmured, running his hand along Thunder's powerful neck. "People are standing with us now." The barn door creaked open, and Sarah entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs. She handed one to Morgan, the rich aroma of hot chocolate rising between them. "Mike's sister sent this over," she explained, sitting beside him on the hay bale. "Said it was her grandmother's special recipe for troubled times." Morgan accepted the mug gratefully. "The whole town's grandmother seems to be sending food. We could feed an army at this point." Sarah laughed softly. "It's how people show love around here. Always has been." They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping their hot chocolate and watching Thunder's rhythmic breathing. The events of the past few days seemed to hover around them, still too fresh to fully process. "Have you heard anything more from the sheriff or the FBI?" Sarah asked finally. Morgan nodded. "Agent Torres called this afternoon. They've uncovered more evidence against Caldwell, forged documents, bribes to local officials, even threats against people who wouldn't sell to him. She thinks they'll have enough for an indictment by the end of the week." "That's good news," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. "Maybe." Morgan's tone was cautious. "But Torres also warned me that Caldwell's getting desperate. He's out on bail, and apparently he's furious about Thunder. Keeps insisting the horse is his, that I'm the thief." Sarah frowned. Surely no one believes him at this point. "People like Caldwell are used to creating their own reality," Morgan replied, setting down his empty mug. "And he's got resources we can't imagine. Torres suggested I consider moving Thunder somewhere even farther away until the case is resolved." "But where?" Sarah asked. "Everyone in town knows he's at Mike's now. Word travels fast." Before Morgan could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching drew their attention. Multiple engines, moving quickly, then stopping abruptly outside. Thunder's head came up sharply, ears pricked forward in alert. Morgan was on his feet instantly, moving to the barn door and peering through a crack. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 black SUVs, their headlights cutting through the darkness, and several men emerging, some carrying flashlights, others with what looked like tranquilizer guns. "It's Caldwell's men," he whispered urgently to Sarah. "They've come for Thunder." Sarah's face paled. "How? The community watch must have been called away or distracted," Morgan said grimly, his mind racing. "We need to get Thunder out of here, now." Outside, they could hear Mike's angry voice confronting the intruders, but he was clearly outnumbered. Morgan led Thunder quickly to the back of the barn, where a smaller door opened onto a fenced paddock. "There's a trail through the woods behind the paddock," he told Sarah, his voice low and urgent. "It leads to the old Miller property, abandoned years ago, but the cabin's still standing. If we can get Thunder there, we might be able to hide until help comes." Sarah nodded, already moving to open the back door while Morgan secured Thunder's halter. The horse sensed their anxiety, his muscles tense beneath Morgan's hands, but he remained surprisingly calm, trusting his human companions. Just as they were about to lead Thunder out, the main barn door burst open. Jenkins stood there, flanked by 2 men holding tranquilizer guns at the ready. "That's far enough, Harper," Jenkins called, his voice cold with triumph. "Mr. Caldwell wants his horse back, and he's authorized us to use whatever means necessary." Morgan stepped in front of Thunder protectively. "This is trespassing, Jenkins, and theft. The FBI has already determined Thunder belongs with me while their investigation proceeds." Jenkins smiled thinly. "Mr. Caldwell disagrees, and unfortunately for you, the local judge who signed our warrant is an old friend of his. He produced a document from his jacket pocket. This authorizes us to recover the stolen property immediately. Morgan's mind raced. The warrant might be legitimate on its face. Caldwell had enough corrupt officials in his pocket to arrange it, but it was based on fraudulent claims. However, arguing that point now, outnumbered and outgunned, would be futile. "Sarah," Morgan said quietly, not taking his eyes off Jenkins, "get ready to run." Sarah tensed beside him, understanding immediately what he intended. Thunder, sensing the imminent action, shifted his weight slightly, muscles coiling in preparation. "Don't be foolish, Harper," Jenkins warned, nodding to his men who raised their tranquilizer guns. "Those darts can drop a horse in seconds. You don't want Thunder hurt." "Neither do you," Morgan countered. "Caldwell wants him perfect for his breeding program, doesn't he? Not injured from a fall after being tranquilized." Jenkins hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Morgan acted. He slapped Thunder's flank hard and shouted, "Go!" Thunder bolted forward, his powerful body surging toward the men who scattered in alarm, unprepared for hundreds of pounds of horse charging directly at them. Morgan and Sarah ran alongside, using the confusion to slip past Jenkins and his men. Outside, the commotion had drawn attention. Neighbors who had been keeping watch from a distance now approached, shouting and honking car horns, adding to the chaos. In the midst of it all, Morgan, Sarah, and Thunder disappeared into the darkness of the woods, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them as they followed the narrow trail deeper into the forest. Thunder moved with surprising agility through the dense trees, negotiating the unfamiliar terrain with an almost uncanny awareness of the safest path. Morgan and Sarah struggled to keep pace, branches whipping against their faces, roots threatening to trip them with each step. "We need to split up," Morgan gasped as they paused in a small clearing, listening for sounds of pursuit. "They'll be tracking us, and Thunder leaves too obvious a trail." Sarah shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving you two." "Not far," Morgan assured her. "Just enough to create confusion. Follow the stream that way," he pointed east, "for about half a mile, then circle back to the Miller cabin. We'll meet you there." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed, squeezing Morgan's hand before disappearing into the underbrush. Morgan turned to Thunder, who stood quietly beside him, sides heaving from the exertion but eyes alert and trusting. "Just you and me now, boy," Morgan whispered, stroking the horse's neck. "Like old times. Let's show them what we're made of." With renewed determination, Morgan led Thunder deeper into the forest, away from the lights of the searching men and toward an uncertain sanctuary in the darkness beyond. The Miller cabin had stood abandoned for nearly a decade, its weathered boards and sagging roof a testament to nature's slow reclamation of human constructions. Situated in a small clearing deep in the forest, it was all but forgotten by most of Willow Creek's residents, exactly why Morgan had chosen it as their sanctuary. Morgan guided Thunder through the dense underbrush, every sense alert for signs of pursuit. The night had grown colder, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Behind them, distant shouts and the occasional flash of searchlights indicated that Jenkins and his men had not given up the chase. "Almost there, boy," Morgan murmured as they approached the clearing. Thunder's ears flicked back and forth, catching every sound, his powerful body tense but obedient under Morgan's guidance. The cabin materialized out of the darkness, a simple structure with a small porch and shuttered windows. Beside it stood an old shed that had once served as a storage space for tools and firewood. Morgan led Thunder toward this smaller building, hoping it would provide adequate shelter for the night. The shed door hung crookedly on rusted hinges, groaning in protest as Morgan pushed it open. Inside, the earthen floor was relatively dry, and enough of the roof remained intact to offer protection from the elements. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. "I know it's not what you're used to," Morgan told Thunder apologetically as he led the horse inside. The stallion sniffed the musty air cautiously, but followed without resistance, his trust in Morgan overriding any misgivings about the strange shelter. After settling Thunder with a reassuring pat, Morgan ventured to the cabin itself. The door was unlocked. There had been nothing worth stealing for years, and he entered cautiously, alert for rotting floorboards or unwelcome wildlife. A quick examination with the flashlight from his phone revealed a single room with a stone fireplace, a rickety table, and what remained of a bed frame. Dust covered everything, undisturbed until his arrival. Morgan gathered what dry wood he could find and started a small fire in the fireplace, careful to keep the flames low to minimize visible smoke. The modest warmth was a welcome relief from the chill night air. As he worked, his mind raced through their options. Jenkins and his men wouldn't give up easily, especially with Caldwell pushing them. By morning, they might have the forest surrounded. The sound of footsteps outside brought Morgan instantly to his feet, heart pounding. He moved silently to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters, ready to run back to Thunder if necessary. "Morgan?" Sarah's voice called softly from the darkness. "It's me." Relief flooded through him as he hurried to open the door. Sarah entered quickly, her clothes damp and muddy from her journey through the woods. "Thank God," she breathed, embracing him briefly before warming her hands by the fire. "I wasn't sure I'd find the place in the dark." "Did anyone follow you?" Morgan asked, closing the door securely behind her. Sarah shook her head. "I don't think so. I crossed the stream 3 times like you said, and I took the long way around that rocky outcrop." She looked around. "Where's Thunder?" "In the shed. It's not much, but it'll keep him sheltered tonight." Sarah nodded, then reached into her pocket and produced her phone. "I've got signal here, barely, but it's something. We should call the sheriff." Morgan considered this, weighing their options. "If we call Wilson, he'll have to come officially. Jenkins has that warrant, forged or influenced, but still official on paper. Wilson might not be able to help us without getting himself in trouble." "Then we call Agent Torres directly," Sarah insisted. "This is exactly the kind of corrupt manipulation the FBI is investigating." Before Morgan could respond, Thunder's shrill whinny pierced the night, a warning sound that Morgan recognized immediately. Someone was approaching the shed. Without hesitation, Morgan extinguished the fire and moved toward the door, gesturing for Sarah to stay back. Outside, the forest had fallen unnaturally silent, the ambient sounds of wildlife conspicuously absent. Morgan crept toward the shed, staying in the shadows, his every sense straining. A beam of light swept across the clearing, a flashlight moving with purpose toward the shed. Morgan caught a glimpse of a figure approaching cautiously, then another behind it. Jenkins had found them. Morgan looked around desperately for anything he could use as a weapon, but found nothing more substantial than a fallen branch. Gripping it tightly, he prepared to defend Thunder, knowing the odds were heavily against him. Just as the first figure reached the shed door, a new sound cut through the night. The unmistakable wail of police sirens in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The figures hesitated, their flashlights swinging toward the source of the sound. "Harper," Jenkins's voice called out from the darkness. "This isn't over. Caldwell doesn't give up what's his." Then the figures retreated, their flashlights bobbing away through the trees as they hurried back the way they had come. Within moments, they had vanished into the forest, leaving Morgan standing in the clearing, still gripping his makeshift weapon, heart pounding in his chest. Sarah emerged from the cabin, her phone in hand, a look of fierce determination on her face. "I called Agent Torres," she explained. "She said she'd been trying to reach us. Apparently, Mike called the FBI when Jenkins showed up with that suspicious warrant. The local agents were already on their way to his place when I reached Torres." Morgan lowered the branch, relief washing over him. Thank God for Mike. They waited in the clearing, Thunder now standing alertly at Morgan's side as the sound of vehicles approaching grew louder. Flashlight beams cut through the trees, but this time they were accompanied by authoritative voices calling Morgan's name. "Here!" Morgan shouted, waving his arms. "We're over here!" Agent Torres emerged from the trees first, followed by two other agents and Sheriff Wilson. The sheriff looked simultaneously relieved and exasperated to see Morgan. "You just can't stay out of trouble, can you?" Wilson sighed, though there was no real reproach in his voice. Torres approached, her expression grim but satisfied. Jenkins and two of his men were intercepted trying to leave the forest. They're being detained for questioning. She looked at Thunder, who regarded her warily. "Is he all right?" Morgan nodded, running a soothing hand down Thunder's neck. "He's fine, confused by all the excitement but unharmed." "Good," Torres replied, "because he's now key evidence in our case against Caldwell." The warrant Jenkins was waving around came from Judge Marshall, who coincidentally received a very generous loan from one of Caldwell's shell companies last month. "Not so coincidental," Sarah remarked dryly. Torres's lips twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. "Indeed, Judge Marshall is now also under investigation, and any orders he signed regarding Caldwell's affairs are being reviewed." "What happens now?" Morgan asked, his hand still resting protectively on Thunder's neck. "Now," Torres said firmly, "we get you and Thunder somewhere truly secure. Caldwell's bail is being revoked as we speak. Attempting to remove evidence pertinent to a federal investigation tends to have that effect. But he still has resources and loyal employees. Until he's formally charged and his network is dismantled, you both need protection." Sheriff Wilson stepped forward. "I've got a place in mind. My brother's ranch, about 50 miles from here. Remote, well-secured, and completely off Caldwell's radar." Morgan looked at Thunder, then at Sarah, uncertainty clouding his features. He had fought so hard to keep Thunder safe, to stay together, and now they were being asked to separate again. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. "I'm coming too," she stated, brooking no argument. "Thunder may need veterinary care, and more importantly, you shouldn't be alone." Morgan felt a wave of gratitude toward this woman who had stood by him through everything. "Thank you," he said simply, the words inadequate for what he felt. As they prepared to leave the forest clearing, Morgan couldn't help but feel that a turning point had been reached. Caldwell's desperate actions had only hastened his downfall, while Morgan's steadfast loyalty to Thunder had rallied an entire community to their side. "Come on, boy," he murmured to Thunder as they walked toward the waiting vehicles. "We've got friends to help us now. This nightmare is almost over." Sheriff Wilson's brother's ranch proved to be everything they had hoped for, a sprawling property nestled in the foothills, with well-maintained stables and lush pastures surrounded by dense forest. Jacob Wilson, a taciturn man with the same steady reliability as his brother, welcomed them without asking too many questions, showing Thunder to a spacious stall with fresh hay and clean water. "He'll be comfortable here," Jacob assured Morgan, watching as Thunder explored his new temporary home. "No one comes up this way without me knowing about it. Road's got only one access point, and I've got cameras covering it." Morgan nodded gratefully, his exhaustion finally catching up with him after the adrenaline of the past 24 hours had subsided. "I can't thank you enough." Jacob waved away his thanks. "Dan told me what you've been through. Man like Caldwell thinks his money puts him above the law, above basic decency. Glad to help prove him wrong." The following days settled into an uneasy routine. Morgan and Sarah stayed in Jacob's guest cabin, a comfortable two-room structure with a small kitchen and a view of the mountains. Thunder adjusted quickly to his new surroundings, seemingly content as long as Morgan visited regularly, which he did, spending hours each day with the stallion, grooming him, walking him around the property, or simply sitting nearby as Thunder grazed. Sarah split her time between helping at the ranch and making trips back to town to check on her veterinary practice and gather news. Agent Torres called daily with updates on the investigation, each report cementing their case against Caldwell, but also revealing the extensive reach of his corrupt influence. "It's like pulling on a thread and watching an entire tapestry unravel," Sarah remarked one evening as she and Morgan sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. "Every day they uncover more officials he bribed, more properties he acquired through intimidation." Morgan nodded, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "I still can't believe how close he came to getting away with it all. If he hadn't fixated on Thunder." "That was his mistake," Sarah agreed. "He could have continued his scheme for years if he'd stuck to land and businesses. But he wanted Thunder because Thunder was the one thing you wouldn't sell, the one challenge to his belief that everything has a price." Morgan looked toward the stables where Thunder was visible in the paddock, his black coat gleaming in the fading light. "Some things don't have a price," he said softly. "Some things are beyond value." The peace of the mountain sanctuary was shattered on the fifth day when Agent Torres arrived unannounced, her normally composed features tight with concern. "Caldwell's disappeared," she announced without preamble as Morgan and Sarah met her at the cabin door. "He was scheduled for a hearing this morning to formalize the revocation of his bail, but he never showed. His electronic monitoring ankle bracelet was found cut off in his empty mansion." Morgan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "Do you think he's coming here?" Torres shook her head. "It's unlikely he knows your location. We've been very careful about that information. But Caldwell is unpredictable and clearly desperate. He's facing decades in prison, the loss of his fortune, his reputation, everything he values. Which makes him dangerous," Sarah concluded, her hand finding Morgan's arm in a gesture of instinctive support. "Exactly," Torres confirmed. "We're allocating additional resources to find him, but in the meantime, I've stationed 2 agents at the entrance to the property, and I'll be staying here myself until we have Caldwell in custody." Despite these reassurances, a shadow had fallen over their sanctuary. Morgan found himself checking and rechecking the locks on the stable, startling at unfamiliar sounds in the night, and keeping Thunder closer than ever during their daily walks. The waiting and uncertainty wore on them all, tension building with each passing day. On the 8th night of their stay, a powerful storm rolled through the mountains, bringing driving rain and violent wind that howled around the cabin and rattled the stable doors. Morgan had insisted on sleeping in the stable with Thunder, unwilling to leave the horse alone during the frightening weather. "I'll be fine," he assured Sarah when she protested. "Thunder's more comfortable when I'm nearby during storms, and frankly, so am I." The stable was warm and dry, the familiar scents of hay and horse bringing Morgan a measure of peace as he settled onto a cot near Thunder's stall. The stallion seemed grateful for the company, occasionally nickering softly as Thunder crashed overhead. Morgan had just begun to drift off, lulled by the rhythmic sound of rain on the roof, when a noise different from the storm caught his attention, the scrape of metal on metal, barely audible above the wind. He sat up, instantly alert, his eyes straining to see through the dimly lit stable. Thunder sensed his tension, the horse's head coming up sharply, ears pricked forward toward the source of the sound. The rear stable door, rarely used and partially hidden by stacked hay bales. Moving silently, Morgan slipped off the cot and crouched low, making his way toward the tack room, where Jacob kept a shotgun mounted on the wall. He had just reached the doorway when the rear stable door swung open with a sudden crash, pushed by the wind as someone released its latch from outside. A figure stood silhouetted against the stormy night, rain dripping from an expensive overcoat that seemed absurdly out of place in the rustic setting. Even before the figure stepped fully into the stable, Morgan recognized Alexander Caldwell. "I knew I'd find you eventually, Harper," Caldwell said, his cultured voice carrying clearly despite the storm. "You and my horse." Morgan stood his ground, putting himself between Caldwell and Thunder's stall. "He was never yours, Caldwell. You know that." Caldwell moved further into the stable, and Morgan saw what he had feared, the glint of a pistol in the millionaire's hand. Caldwell's normally immaculate appearance had deteriorated. His hair was disheveled, his face unshaven, and his eyes held a dangerous, almost feverish gleam. "Everything I want becomes mine," Caldwell stated, as if explaining a simple fact of life. "That's how the world works. The strong take what they desire, and the weak accept it." "Is that what you've been telling yourself all these years?" Morgan asked, trying to keep Caldwell talking while his mind raced for a way out of this confrontation. "That your money makes you strong? That it gives you the right to take whatever you want?" Caldwell's laugh was brittle, tinged with the hysteria of a man watching his world collapse. "My money doesn't give me the right. It gives me the power. There's a difference." He gestured with the gun toward Thunder's stall. "Now step aside. I've lost everything because of you and that horse. The least I can salvage is the satisfaction of taking him with me." "Taking him where, Caldwell?" Morgan asked, not moving an inch. "You're a fugitive. Every law enforcement agency in the country is looking for you. Where exactly do you plan to go with a horse that everyone knows was stolen?" Uncertainty flickered across Caldwell's face, quickly replaced by a cold determination. "That's not your concern. Move aside, or I'll make you." Behind Morgan, Thunder grew increasingly agitated, sensing the tension and threat in the air. The stallion's movements became more restless, his powerful hooves striking against the stall door. "You hear that?" Morgan said quietly. "He knows you're a threat. He'll never go with you willingly, and you'll never break him. Men like you don't understand creatures like Thunder. You can't buy loyalty or trust." "I don't need his trust," Caldwell snapped, raising the gun higher. "Just his obedience. Last chance, Harper. Step aside." Morgan stood firm, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "No." For a heartbeat, time seemed suspended between them. A simple farmer and a powerful millionaire, their values and worlds colliding in this remote stable as the storm raged outside. Then Caldwell's finger tightened on the trigger, his face contorting with rage and desperation. "So be it," he said coldly. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Caldwell's finger tightened on the trigger, Thunder let out a piercing whinny and crashed against his stall door with such force that the entire stable seemed to shake. The sudden noise and movement startled Caldwell, causing his aim to waver at the critical moment. The gun discharged with a deafening crack, the bullet splintering wood inches from Morgan's head. In the split second of Caldwell's distraction, Morgan lunged forward, grabbing the millionaire's wrist and forcing the gun upward. They struggled, Caldwell's desperation lending him strength that belied his refined appearance. The gun fired again, this time into the ceiling, sending dust and debris showering down on them. "You've ruined everything," Caldwell snarled, his face contorted with rage as they grappled for control of the weapon. "Everything I've built." Morgan didn't waste breath responding, focused entirely on keeping the gun pointed away from himself and Thunder. They crashed against a stack of hay bales, tumbling to the ground with Caldwell momentarily on top, using his weight to pin Morgan down. The gun, still clutched between their hands, inched closer to Morgan's face. "You should have sold him when you had the chance," Caldwell hissed, his eyes wild with a mixture of hatred and fear. "A simple transaction. But you had to be noble, didn't you? Had to stand on principle." Morgan strained against Caldwell's weight, feeling his strength beginning to ebb. In that desperate moment, Thunder's stall door burst open, the latch, weakened by the horse's earlier assault, finally giving way. Thunder charged out, moving with purpose directly toward the struggling men. Caldwell's eyes widened in terror as hundreds of pounds of agitated horse bore down on him. He rolled off Morgan just in time to avoid Thunder's hooves, losing his grip on the gun in the process. The weapon skittered across the stable floor, coming to rest against the far wall. Thunder positioned himself between Morgan and Caldwell, ears pinned back, nostrils flared, every line of his powerful body radiating protective fury. Morgan scrambled to his feet, placing a steadying hand on Thunder's flank. "It's okay, boy," he murmured, though his eyes never left Caldwell, who had backed himself against the wall, his confident demeanor shattered by the reality of his situation. "Call him off," Caldwell demanded, his voice cracking with fear. "Get that animal away from me." "He's not an attack dog, Caldwell," Morgan replied calmly. "He's a horse protecting someone he trusts, something you wouldn't understand." A new voice cut through the tension. "Federal agents, drop your weapon." Agent Torres stood in the doorway, her service pistol trained on Caldwell, two more agents flanking her with their weapons similarly drawn. Behind them, Sarah's worried face appeared, her eyes quickly finding Morgan's in relief. "The gun's over there," Morgan indicated with a nod, keeping his hand on Thunder's neck, feeling the horse's rapid heartbeat beginning to slow as the immediate threat receded. Torres moved forward cautiously, her weapon never wavering from Caldwell. "Alexander Caldwell, you're under arrest for violations of federal racketeering statutes, attempted assault, breaking the conditions of your bail, and about 24 other charges we'll sort out later." As one of the agents secured the discarded pistol and another moved to handcuff Caldwell, the millionaire seemed to physically diminish, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man facing the consequences of his actions for perhaps the first time in his life. "You don't understand what it's like," Caldwell said quietly as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "To want something so badly you can taste it. To know it should be yours." Morgan met his gaze steadily. "That's where you're wrong, Caldwell. I do understand wanting something badly. The difference is, I was willing to earn Thunder's trust, not steal it." As the agents led Caldwell away, Sarah rushed to Morgan's side, her hands quickly examining him for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "We heard gunshots." Morgan shook his head, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to fade, leaving him feeling drained. "I'm fine, thanks to Thunder." He stroked the horse's neck gratefully. "He saved my life." Agent Torres approached after ensuring Caldwell was secured in one of the FBI vehicles. "We got here as fast as we could. One of our surveillance cameras picked up movement on the service road, but the storm interfered with the signal. By the time we realized it was Caldwell, he was already inside." "How did he find us?" Sarah asked, still standing close to Morgan, as if reassuring herself that he was truly unharmed. "We're still piecing that together," Torres replied. "But it appears he bribed someone at the county sheriff's office, not Wilson, one of the dispatchers, to access communications about your location. It was the last card he had to play." Morgan looked toward the open door where Caldwell had been taken away. "What happens now?" "Now," Torres said with finality, "Caldwell's case is airtight. Attempted assault with a deadly weapon, on top of everything else we've uncovered. He'll be spending the next couple of decades at minimum in federal prison." She paused, then added with a slight smile, "And Thunder can go home." Those simple words, "Thunder can go home," hit Morgan with unexpected force. After weeks of fighting, running, and living in fear, the prospect of returning to normal life seemed almost too good to be true. "It's really over?" he asked, needing to hear the confirmation again. Torres nodded. "Caldwell's network is dismantled. His assets are frozen pending trial, and most of his associates are either in custody or cooperating with our investigation in exchange for leniency." She glanced at Thunder, who had calmed considerably but still remained protectively close to Morgan. "You two are free to go home whenever you're ready." That night, after the FBI had departed with Caldwell and the storm had finally abated, Morgan sat with Sarah on the cabin porch, a blanket wrapped around their shoulders against the cool, rain-washed air. The stars had emerged, brilliant and clear after the storm, their light reflecting in puddles scattered across the yard. "I can hardly believe it's over," Morgan said, his voice soft in the night stillness. "There were moments I thought we'd never get back to normal." Sarah leaned slightly against his shoulder, a gesture that felt both new and somehow familiar. "Normal might look a little different now," she observed, "after everything that's happened." Morgan considered this, thinking about the community that had rallied around him, the bonds that had been strengthened through adversity, and the woman sitting beside him who had risked everything to help him protect Thunder. "Different," he agreed, "but better, I think." In the stable, Thunder rested peacefully, his ordeal finally at an end. Tomorrow would bring the journey home, back to the farm where he belonged, with the man who had fought so hard to protect him. As Morgan and Sarah sat in companionable silence watching the stars, Morgan reflected on the strange journey that had begun with Caldwell's arrival at his farm. The millionaire had sought to take what wasn't his, believing his wealth entitled him to whatever he desired. Instead, he had lost everything: his freedom, his fortune, his reputation, while Morgan, who had seemed to have so much less to begin with, had emerged with everything that truly mattered intact. It was, Morgan thought, a peculiar kind of justice, a reminder that some things in life remained beyond the reach of money and power. Some things, like loyalty, trust, and love, had to be earned, not purchased. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "You know, I've been thinking about what Caldwell said, about strong people taking what they want." Morgan turned to look at her, seeing her profile silvered by starlight. "What about it?" "He had it all wrong," she said simply. "Real strength isn't about taking. It's about standing firm when it would be easier to give in. It's about protecting what matters, even when it costs you." She met his gaze. "By that measure, Morgan Harper, you're the strongest man I've ever known." Morgan felt something warm unfurl in his chest, a feeling of possibility, of futures opening before him that he hadn't dared to consider during the long weeks of struggle. "We should get some rest," he said finally, though he made no move to rise. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day." Sarah nodded, but like Morgan, seemed reluctant to break the peaceful moment. "Thunder's going home," she said softly. "Right where he belongs." "We all are," Morgan replied, and in the quiet that followed, he knew that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, Morgan, Thunder, and Sarah, bound by a connection that even the most powerful forces couldn't break. The journey back to Harper Farm was like a homecoming parade. Word had spread quickly about Caldwell's arrest and the vindication of Morgan and Thunder, and as they drove through Willow Creek, people lined the streets, waving and cheering. Morgan, overwhelmed by the display, sat in the passenger seat of Sarah's station wagon, occasionally raising a hand in acknowledgement. Behind them, Jacob Wilson drove his truck, pulling the trailer carrying Thunder. "I don't understand," Morgan said quietly to Sarah. "These people barely know me." Sarah smiled, keeping her eyes on the road. "They know enough. They know you stood up to someone who thought his money could buy anything, including justice. In a world where that feels increasingly rare, it matters." As they approached the turnoff to Harper Farm, Morgan was startled to see dozens of vehicles parked along his normally quiet country road. People milled about his property, and a large banner hung from the barn. "Welcome home, Morgan and Thunder." "What in the world?" Morgan breathed as they pulled into the driveway. Mike stepped forward from the crowd, grinning broadly. "Surprise! We figured you deserved a proper welcome after everything you've been through." The community had come together to prepare for their return. The farm, which had been neglected during Morgan's absence, had been restored to working order. Fences were mended, the barn cleaned and stocked with fresh hay. Even the farmhouse had been given a fresh coat of paint. "We couldn't let you come back to chores," explained Mrs. Peterson, the orchard owner, as she handed Morgan a basket of still warm apple muffins. "Not after what you did for all of us." "What I did?" Morgan asked, confused. "You showed us we don't have to give in," said Tom Jenkins, the hardware store owner. Caldwell had been pressuring half the businesses in town, threatening foreclosures, offering generous buyouts that were anything but. "Your stand gave us courage to fight back." Morgan was speechless, moved beyond words by the community's support. As Jacob backed the trailer up to the paddock, a hush fell over the gathered crowd. The moment Thunder was led down the ramp onto home soil, a cheer erupted that startled birds from nearby trees. The black stallion pranced nervously at first, overwhelmed by the noise in the crowd. But as Morgan approached and placed a calming hand on his neck, Thunder settled, seeming to recognize that he was finally home. The celebration continued throughout the afternoon, neighbors sharing food and stories, children cautiously approaching to admire Thunder under Morgan's watchful eye, and more than one bottle of locally brewed cider being passed around. Sheriff Wilson arrived later, bringing news that further cemented the feeling of closure. "Judge Marshall has resigned," he announced to Morgan and Sarah as they sat on the porch steps watching the festivities. "And the county assessor's office is reviewing all property valuations made during Caldwell's time in the area. Your tax bill has already been corrected." "And the bank?" Morgan asked, thinking of the mortgage threats that had started his ordeal. Wilson smiled. "The regional manager was one of Caldwell's people. He's been replaced, and the new manager has assured me that all Harper Farm loan terms will be honored as originally written." As evening approached, the crowd began to thin, people returning to their own homes with promises to check in on Morgan in the coming days. Soon, only Sarah remained, helping Morgan clear away the last of the celebration debris. "You don't have to stay," Morgan told her as they carried empty plates to the kitchen. "You must be exhausted." Sarah set down her stack of dishes and turned to face him directly. "Morgan Harper, after everything we've been through, do you really think I'm going to leave now? Besides," she added with a gentle smile, "someone needs to check on Thunder before bed. Doctor's orders." Together they walked to the barn, where Thunder had settled comfortably in his familiar stall. The horse nickered softly as they approached, his eyes bright in the lantern light. "He looks happy to be home," Sarah observed, reaching over the stall door to stroke Thunder's nose. "But," she prompted gently when he trailed off. "But as someone who belongs here," he finished simply. "With us." Sarah's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I was hoping you might ask," she admitted. "And yes, I would like that very much." The moment was interrupted by Thunder's insistent nudging at their shoulders, as if the horse was expressing his approval of this new arrangement. They both laughed, the sound echoing in the barn's rafters, a promise of lighter days ahead. 6 months later, as spring returned to Willow Creek, the story of Morgan, Thunder, and their stand against Alexander Caldwell had become something of a local legend. Caldwell himself was now serving the first year of a 20-year federal sentence, his empire dismantled, his corrupt influence a fading memory. Harper Farm flourished under the care of not just Morgan, but Sarah as well, who had gradually moved most of her veterinary practice to the property, converting an old storage building into a small clinic. Thunder, now the unofficial mascot of the farm, greeted visitors with a dignified bearing that never failed to impress. On a particularly fine morning, Morgan stood at the paddock fence, watching as Thunder galloped across the spring green pasture, his black coat gleaming in the sunlight. Sarah joined him, slipping her hand into his with the easy familiarity they had developed. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, following his gaze to where Thunder had paused to graze, the picture of contentment. "I was just thinking about value," Morgan replied. "About what things are really worth." Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. Not what someone's willing to pay for them. Exactly. Morgan turned to face her, the love he felt reflected in her eyes. Caldwell never understood that some things can't be bought. They can only be earned. Trust, loyalty, love. He squeezed her hand gently. The things that actually matter. Thunder lifted his head and nickered softly in their direction, as if affirming Morgan's words. Then, with a flick of his tail, he resumed his grazing, secure in the knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged. "He knows he's home," Sarah observed. Morgan smiled, thinking of all they had weathered together and the peaceful life they had built from the wreckage of Caldwell's schemes. "We all are," he replied. As they stood there hand in hand, with Thunder moving freely across the fields of Harper Farm, Morgan reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A journey that had begun with a wealthy man's arrogance and ended with the simple truth that the most valuable things in life were those that no amount of money could buy. Caldwell had sought to take what wasn't his, using his wealth and power to bend the world to his will. But in doing so, he had lost everything, while Morgan, by standing firm for what he believed in, had gained more than he could have imagined. It was, Morgan thought, watching as Thunder raised his proud head to the spring breeze, the perfect justice, a reminder that karma, when it comes, often arrives not with a roar, but with the quiet certainty of truth prevailing over power, of right winning out over might, and that in the end was worth more than all the riches in the world.